The year was 1959. The cold grip of the Ural Mountains was merciless, biting through every layer of clothing, every ounce of resolve. A group of 9 hikers, young and ambitious, had set out on what was meant to be an exhilarating winter expedition across the snowbound slopes of the northern Urals. At the head of the group was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student with a reputation for discipline and an unshakable spirit. The journals and photographs they carried tell us that their spirits were high. The men laughed, the women sang, and they believed themselves invincible against the elements. They wrote about the biting winds, the difficulty of pitching their tent on the icy slopes of Kholat-Syakhl, the mountain of the dead, as the local Mansi tribe ominously called it. They thought the name little more than superstition. But there is something the official reports never revealed. Among Dyatlov's belongings, recovered weeks later by search teams, there were missing pages from his diary. Those pages, according to whispers in old archives, were separated from the rest. Decades later, in 2002, a freelance journalist named Anton Lebedev stumbled across an envelope in a crumbling government building in Sverdlovsk. It was marked only with the words, "Do not open." Inside, he found fragments of handwritten notes, scrawled lines that didn't match Dyatlov's usual precise handwriting. The words were shaky, panicked, some written in near illegible haste. Anton realized that if authentic, these pages could provide the missing link in one of Russia's greatest unsolved mysteries. The notes began innocuously enough. They described the usual: frostbite creeping in, complaints of hunger, camaraderie against the cold. But as Anton turned the fragile sheets, the tone shifted. The writing grew erratic. There were mentions of lights above the ridge, of strange whistling in the night, and of shadows that moved without bodies. The last line on the first fragment made Anton's blood run cold. "We should not have come here. Something is waiting for us on this mountain." Anton sat in silence, staring at the words. The snowstorm outside his window howled like the voices of the past, and for the first time, he felt that the mystery of Dyatlov Pass was not a tragedy born of nature, but something far darker. And this was only the beginning. The first of the missing diary fragments placed Anton right inside the hikers' last nights on the mountain. The page was torn, but the date suggested it was written just 2 days before their deaths. "The wind is strange tonight," it began. "Not the usual howl. It carries something, like voices carried from far away. None of us want to admit it, but we hear them. Whispers calling our names." Anton reread the words several times. The handwriting was uneven, letters slanted as though the writer's hand shook with fear. Another page followed. This one seemed to come from Zina Ida, the only woman whose diary had been officially recovered. But this fragment was not in any archives Anton had ever seen. "At night, the snow glows faintly blue. Not from the moon. We thought it was our eyes playing tricks, but when we touched it, it pulsed with light." Kolya screamed. Said he saw hands moving beneath the ice. The handwriting trailed off, followed by a smudge that looked unnervingly like blood. Anton turned to the next sheet. "We moved the tent further down the slope. Nobody said it out loud, but we all felt it, that something was behind us. Every gust of wind carried it closer. Yuri asked if we should abandon the climb. Dyatlov refused. He said we were imagining things, that fear was more dangerous than any phantom. But when the lights appeared again over the ridge, green, swirling, silent, nobody argued anymore. The fragments ended abruptly there. No context, no conclusion. Just one final scribbled sentence at the bottom of the torn page. If we do not return, do not look for us. Do not come to this place." Anton leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding. He thought of the official explanation: hypothermia, panic, disorientation. Yet here was evidence, long buried, that pointed to something else entirely. But what disturbed him most was that the handwriting on these fragments didn't belong to just one person. Each line, each page, seemed written by a different hand. It was as if every hiker, one by one, had tried to record their final thoughts, before the mountain consumed them. The envelope held only one last item: a faded black and white photograph. 9 figures, barely visible, standing in the snow with their backs to the camera. At first, Anton assumed it was just the group taken during their trip. But then he noticed something. A 10th shadow stretched out among them. Taller. Thinner. Not belonging to anyone visible in the frame. Anton closed his eyes, but the image burned into his mind. Something had been with them on that mountain. And now it felt as though it had followed him home. The night on Kholat-Syakhl was said to be colder than death itself. Temperatures had dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. The wind clawing at the canvas of the tent like a predator eager to tear its prey apart. Yet the diary fragments Anton had just uncovered painted the scene not as a tragedy of weather, but as a descent into something far more terrifying. He closed his eyes and let the words pull him into that night. Inside the tent, 9 figures huddled close, their breath misting in the lantern light. The silence outside was unnatural. No ordinary wind. It carried something with it, low, guttural tones like a chant in a language none of them knew. Zinaida clutched her notebook, her knuckles white. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. Yuri, the youngest, nodded, his teeth chattering, not just from the cold. "It's not the wind. It's calling." Dyatlov, their leader, tried to steady them. He forced a smile, though his face was pale. "We're exhausted. The mind plays tricks in places like this. Tomorrow we descend." But his voice lacked conviction. He heard it too. Then came the light. Not the soft glow of moonlight reflected off snow. This was a column of pale green that bled across the sky, rippling silently. It shifted, almost alive, weaving in and out of the clouds. One of the hikers, Krivonischenko, screamed. "There. Behind it, do you see them?" All eyes turned. Through the shimmering veil of light, faint silhouettes emerged. At first they seemed like people, tall, motionless figures standing among the trees far below. But as the light pulsed, their shapes elongated, bent, and split, like shadows that had forgotten how to be human. The group erupted into chaos. The tent suddenly felt suffocating. Something was pressing in from all sides. The air smelled metallic, sharp, as if charged with electricity. The first tear in the canvas came not from a knife, but from outside. A long slash, as though claws had raked across it. Snow blew in violently, and with it, the whispering voices grew louder. "No, no, they're inside," Ludmila cried. Her scream was swallowed by the howling wind. In the panic, the hikers tore through the opposite side of the tent with their knives, clawing their way into the night. The cold hit them like a wall, but it was nothing compared to what they left behind in the tent. Because something had entered. Anton shivered as he pictured the moment, their desperate dash into the snow, barefoot, half-dressed, scattering down the slope in different directions. The footprints later found in the snow confirmed this. But what no official record ever mentioned were the shapes moving beside those prints. Prints that didn't belong to any human. One of the fragments described it. "We thought we escaped, but the snow moved with us. Long arms, faceless heads gliding. We are not alone." Anton slammed the diary shut, his chest heaving. The silence of his apartment pressed against him. For the first time, he understood why the government buried these fragments. It wasn't just hypothermia. Something had hunted them. And Anton could feel, no, he knew, that by reading their words he had invited it closer. Anton sat in the dim light of his apartment, the storm outside hammering against his windows. The air felt heavier now, as though the very act of reading had pulled the past closer to him. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the next fragment of paper. Words written in uneven strokes, almost gouged into the page. "If we die, let it be known it was not the snow nor the storm. They come in the night. They feed on our fear. They are not human." The hiker who wrote it hadn't signed their name. Perhaps they no longer remembered who they were. Anton leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The diary wasn't just telling him what happened. It was forcing him to feel it. His mind was there, with them, on that frozen slope, running barefoot through the snow. He could almost hear their breaths, ragged, frantic, and cut short one by one. The first bodies were found near the edge of the forest, but what the official reports never described was the sound that preceded their deaths. The hikers huddled under a cedar tree, desperate to light a fire. The wood was wet, the flame weak. The whispers followed them, weaving between the crackle of branches. Shadows slithered just beyond the reach of the firelight. Then came the sound. A low hum, almost mechanical but layered with something organic, like the vibration of a throat far larger than any human's. The ground itself seemed to pulse with it. Krivonischenko pressed his hands over his ears and screamed, his eyes rolling back. Blood trickled from his nose. The others pulled him closer to the fire, but his body convulsed violently. "They're inside him," Zinaida whispered, clutching her arms. "Do you see? They're inside." The fire sputtered out, smothered by an unnatural gust of wind. Darkness swallowed them. When it lifted, Krivonischenko was gone. Only a trail of shallow, dragging marks remained in the snow, leading deeper into the trees. None of them dared follow. Anton flipped to the next entry, written by Dyatlov himself. "We are losing ourselves. I look at my friends and do not see them anymore. Their eyes are wrong. The snow moves when it should not. The forest is full of watchers. I hear my own voice outside the camp when I am still here. We cannot fight them. We can only hope someone finds what remains. Anton's throat tightened. These weren't just words. They were confessions written by people on the edge of reality, trapped between life and something else entirely. He knew how the story ended. 9 hikers dead, their bodies twisted and broken in ways no avalanche or storm could explain. But the fragments made it clear. Death had not come all at once. One by one, the hikers were consumed, not just physically but mentally, as though their very identities were being peeled away. In the final fragment of Part 4, Anton found the most disturbing detail yet. If anyone reads this, do not seek us. We are not what we were. The snow remembers our names now, and it whispers them back to us. If you hear your name on the mountain, do not answer. Anton dropped the page, his breath sharp and shallow. For a moment he thought he heard something outside his apartment window. Not the storm. Not the city. A whisper. And it sounded like his name. The rescuers who went into the Ural Mountains weeks later thought they were prepared. They expected snow, death, and silence. What they found was nothing any of them spoke of publicly again. Official reports described bodies discovered in stages. Some half-naked, some with fractured skulls and broken ribs, some with their eyes or tongues missing. But the fragments Anton held in his trembling hands revealed what the rescuers truly saw. The first group was found near the treeline. But they weren't lying peacefully in the snow. They were sitting upright, one rescuer wrote in a suppressed letter smuggled into the archive. Their bodies stiff, their faces turned upward as if listening. Their eyes were wide open, frozen in terror, but also waiting. We called out to them before we realized they weren't alive. The corpses were not simply dead, they had been arranged. Further up the slope, another body lay sprawled in the snow. Only it wasn't frozen stiff like the others. I swear on my life, the rescuer wrote, I saw its chest rise. Just once. A shallow breath. When I leaned closer, the head jerked toward me, and though the lips were gone, the teeth chattered like words I couldn't understand. Then it stopped. They buried that page deep in the official files, calling it delirium of exhaustion. Anton's stomach churned as he read on. The words seemed etched into his mind. They were not simply victims. They were being remade. Something inside the snow claimed them. What returned to us were shells, bodies animated by whispers that did not belong to them anymore. The missing eyes, the missing tongue, officially explained away by scavengers or decomposition. But in the diary, one hiker wrote otherwise. They took them while we still breathed. I saw little Wake screaming as her eyes dissolved into black. I saw Sasha try to speak but only blood came, and then his voice echoed in the forest while his mouth was silent. Anton gripped the papers so tightly they nearly tore. His pulse hammered in his ears. This wasn't history, it was intrusion. The hikers had become something else, their voices absorbed into the mountain, their bodies left behind as warnings. And now, through these fragments, that same presence was reaching into Anton's small apartment. He froze. The storm outside had quieted, but the air still pulsed with that low mechanical hum he'd read about. His glass of water on the table trembled, vibrating softly. Then came the whisper. Not from outside. Not from the street. From within the room. It called his name. Anton sat frozen in his chair, his breath shallow, his fingers still clutching the yellowed papers. The whisper repeated his name, soft at first, then layered, like dozens of mouths speaking at once, echoing from every corner of the room. Anton. He turned toward the window. The storm had stopped. The snow outside lay still, untouched, reflecting a pale light. Yet in the glass, his own reflection was not alone. Behind him, faint silhouettes stood, thin, elongated, their mouths open but unblinking. He whipped his head around. The apartment was empty. Silent. But when he looked back at the glass, the figures remained, closer now, their faces stretched and frozen into the same terror-stricken expressions described in the reports. He dropped the papers, scattering them across the floor. The humming in the air deepened, rattling the light bulb overhead. Words flickered in his mind, not spoken aloud but pressed into his skull. You read. You remember. Now you belong. Anton staggered toward the door, fumbling with the lock. His hands shook so violently he couldn't turn it. Behind him, the scattered pages began to move, lifted by no wind, curling upward like something invisible breathed through them. The photographs of the hikers' bodies trembled, then tore themselves into strips. And from those strips, shadows crawled out. He slammed his shoulder into the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whisper rose into a shriek, filling his ears, vibrating through his bones. He screamed back at it, raw, desperate, human. The noise stopped. For one terrible heartbeat there was silence. Then, from just behind his shoulder, he felt the warmth of a breath. "Don't look away." Anton turned. What stood before him was not one figure but nine. 9 hikers, their faces mutilated, their bodies twisted, their eyes black and endless. Yet each carried a strange familiarity, as if part of them was still human, still aware, still suffering. They moved toward him in unison, their mouths opening and closing in a grotesque mimicry of speech. And in that distorted chorus, Anton understood the final truth. The Dyatlov past tragedy had never been explained because it wasn't over. It was waiting. And now it had found another witness. When Anton's neighbors finally forced open his door the next morning, they found his apartment empty. The table overturned. The papers gone. The only sign he had ever been there was the frost that coated every wall, and a single phrase carved deep into the wooden floorboards with bare, bleeding fingers. "Don't look away."